Good morning. This is Mike Billington. I'm here today with the LaRouche Organization daily update for Monday, August 29th. Harley was unavailable today. I'm substituting for him, but he will be back tomorrow. So let me begin with the annual Jackson Hole meeting, which began on Friday, attended by the world's central bankers and other hedge funds and bankers. It was at the Jackson Hole meeting in 2019 that Mark Carney, then the governor of the Bank of England, called for a regime change in the world financial system. Regime change. He wanted to replace the US dollar with a central bank digital currency. This currency would be programmable so that the good lords of the City of London could determine what things it could buy and which things it could not buy. If you wanted to buy meat, for instance, which is not green enough for the Bank of England, then you could be programmed not to do so. Your digital currency would not allow you. So it's no surprise that Carney went on to become the green czar at the United Nations. So what are the results of this so-called Great Reset, the greening of the Western financial system, together with the insane sanctions regime being carried out against Russia and China and others? Let's look at the collapsing physical economy across the transatlantic. In France and in Germany, electric costs have risen from 100 euro last year to 1,000 euro, right? A tenfold increase. France's price cap, they have a price cap for consumers that the suppliers can charge consumers for electricity. That's going to run out at the end of the year. For now, they're only cutting electricity or gouging factories and businesses, but at the end of the year, it will go to consumers. This is already happening in the UK. The economy across the UK is in a state of total breakdown crisis. The cap on electricity prices there is going to rise by 80% on October 1st, and it'll rise again in January and April. If this continues, there will be a total of about a 600% rise in electricity prices. Similar things are happening with the gas supply, where most people in the UK heat their home with gas. So we're looking at a winter where you will be freezing and hungry. Nearly every union in the UK is preparing to strike, and you can expect nothing less. People simply cannot live this way. But the strikes will not succeed in getting their wage demands, since the entire dollar-based financial system is in a state of hyperinflationary collapse. They're not going to gain new wages. There's no solution to this crisis within the system itself. The only thing that can work is for working people in unions to join with people around the world in demanding a new system, one that's based on equity and dignity for mankind. The farm demonstrations going on, which I'm sure you've all read about, in the Netherlands and in Germany, these are a different story. What they're demanding is an end to the insane green policies, which are forcing farmers not to grow food, even while the world is suffering a famine of biblical proportions, as David Beasley, the head of the World Food Program, puts it. They're being told to cut food production by 35%, to cull their herds, to stop using fertilizers. This is Malthusian genocide, whose only purpose is to reduce the world's population through the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Go to the Schiller Institute.com to see a 15-minute video we just produced with testimony from farmers in Germany, but also in the US, in Chile, and Mexico, supporting the farmers in Holland and Germany who are standing up for the human race to allow producers to produce the food needed by the human race. So how did Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve today, how did he open up the Jackson Hole meeting in his Friday speech? He said that the Fed would continue raising interest rates. These monetarists, you understand, they can only think within the system. You raise interest rates or you lower interest rates. But in this case, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. If you stay at zero interest rates, as we've had now for many years, you're going to have hyperinflation, not just hyperinflation like you see today, but the kind of hyperinflation that you've all read about in 1923 Germany, when the currency became absolutely worthless and you needed a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread, right? But if you raise rates, as Powell is suggesting, you're going to get a wave of corporate bankruptcies unprecedented in modern history. Companies are already getting crushed by energy costs and the supply chain problems. Fertilizer companies and other productive companies are shutting down across Europe. And if you then hit them with exorbitant borrowing costs to pay for these exorbitant debts, you're going to see massive bankruptcies. And then, believe it or not, Powell said that if it didn't work, what he's doing now to stop inflation, then he'll use the successful method used by Paul Volcker in the early 1980s. Those of you old enough may remember that this was when Volcker, who was the head of the Federal Reserve at that time, raised interest rates to 20%. Shock therapy, he called it. At that time, Lyndon LaRouche had a statement about what Volcker was doing, which I want to read to you. He said, in earlier public statements, Mr. Volcker has stated himself to be a supporter of a doctrine of, quote, controlled disintegration for both the United States and the world economy. Now, under the semantic pretext of anti-inflation and fiscal austerity, Volcker has abused his powers as Federal Reserve Chairman to implement measures which constitute an efficient effort to plunge the US economy into misery, chaos, and confusion of the sort ultimately worse than the conditions experienced during the Great Depression of the 1930s. His conduct in office must be regarded as no better than treasonous in character, if not formally treason by the strict language of the US Constitution. So this was the era where globalization was implemented in spades, as they say. Shipping industries overseas, it was no longer profitable to produce within the United States. They went out looking for cheap labor in Mexico and China and elsewhere. We stopped building infrastructure. We didn't care about long-term growth and development or increasing the productivity of the population. It was all bail out the banks and make short-term speculative profit. Now, I want to read another statement that came out from a Chinese economist. How do the Chinese look at what's going on in the United States, and especially with what's happening at Jackson Hole? There was an article day before yesterday, in the Global Times, the English language Chinese government newspaper. And it's commenting on what's happening at the central bank conference at Jackson Hole. To what they call, the article says, witnessing the economically unsustainable international currency system centered on the US dollar. And that the rest of the world is increasingly looking for substitutes for the failing system. They then quote a man by the name of Mei Xinyu. Mei Xinyu is an economist. He's at the Ministry of Commerce. And he gives a statement, which I'm going to read, which is very much in keeping with the policy that Lyndon LaRouche has argued since 1971, that this was what was happening to the Western economy. And what had made the American economy the world's greatest economy before, during, and after World War II. Ms. Dr. May says, quote, the dollar's status as the world's currency was based on the US once paramount economic productivity. This is the creation of the infrastructure and the science and technology which increases the productivity of everyone in the society. This is the labor productivity propped up through that commitment to the infrastructure. It goes on. That productivity was gutted as the Fed's quantitative easing policy, that's the printing of money in unlimited amounts to bail out the debt. The quantitative easing policy, which fundamentally decimated the US manufacturing sector's competitiveness. Now, whatever policy the Federal Reserve chooses to deal with inflation is unlikely to bolster the US real economy. The sudden tightening after years of easing, zero interest rates for years and now tightening, raising interest rates, along with the large role of the virtual economy in the US economy, not the real economy, but the virtual economy, is very likely to cause a financial crisis. The US wanton sanctions against other countries have accelerated the fall of the US dollar-based system. Now, this is a very powerful thing coming from China. And here we see a very, very great irony. While the US has completely abandoned the American system, that of Alexander Hamilton and Henry Carey and Abraham Lincoln. That was a system that demanded that the government take responsibility for directing the credit of the nation into infrastructure, science, technology, health, education. All right, that system has been replaced by the British system: free markets, free trade, no government regulation, let the banks run the economy. Right? But ironically, the American system is alive and well, only not in America. Where? In China. Now, China is definitely not following the American political system. But I think any of you who are watching this today, who are living in America, will agree with me that our political system is a total disaster, total chaos. Both parties are fully supporting the madness of perpetual war, preparing for wars against Russia and China, nuclear powers. While the population is diverted from the danger of nuclear war or the collapse of the entire Western financial system by artificial hot button issues, which are guaranteed to divide: guns, race, abortion, things of that sort. But China is following the American system of economics. If you don't believe me, and if you have not already, I really encourage you to watch an interview I did. You can find it on the LaRouche organization or the Executive Intelligence Review websites. An interview I did with Justin Yifu Lin. Dr. Lin was a leading economist in China, but he also was the chief economist at the World Bank for 4 years, from 2008 to 2012. So he's well known and well respected in the West. But what he told me is that while he was at the World Bank, he found out that the mostly US and British bankers who really run these institutions have no interest in building infrastructure. They don't want to build infrastructure in the third world. They say that's not appropriate for their level of development. We'll help them with the small farmer getting his food to market, but don't talk about railroads and power plants and so forth. So the Chinese, he left the World Bank. He came back to China. He's now at Beijing University. He became advisor to the Belt and Road Initiative, the great infrastructure project that China is taking to the rest of the world, right? That, in other words, they understood that infrastructure was the key stumbling block to keeping countries in poverty. And he emphasized to me that China had followed the system of Alexander Hamilton. That's what turned China from poverty to great wealth. That's what lifted 800 million people out of abject poverty. Created a great prosperity across the nation, scientific breakthroughs, space programs. And now they're taking this Hamiltonian method, American system method, to the rest of the world through the Belt and Road Initiative. And believe me, that is why the US and British intelligence are running this hate campaign against China, right? They don't like the fact that China is offering the global South the American system, to escape from poverty, to become modern agro-industrial countries. While we are following the British in wanting to keep the third world backwards, to exploit their cheap raw materials and their cheap labor, even if it means the undermining of our own economies, as we're doing, for instance, with the sanctions policy against Russia, which is destroying the West, not Russia. So please register for the Schiller Institute conference, which is going to be held on September 10th and 11th. It's going to be honoring Lyndon LaRouche, who would have had his 100th birthday on September 8th. And we will be focusing on the fact that only his policies, the idea of a global policy, bringing the great nations of the world together to discuss how to inspire humanity to survive the greatest crisis in world history. I encourage you to register, and I encourage you to be back here tomorrow. Harley will be back. So thank you.